Hello, Joey here, and in this video, I'm gonna show you how to automate After Effects. We're gonna walk through a few different ways of doing this, including building templates that other human beings can use to save you time, and we're also gonna build a completely autonomous render robot using Templater from Dataclay, which is a very cool plugin you are gonna love. There is a lot jam-packed into this video. You're gonna learn a ton, so let's roll those credits. Now, automation is all about saving you time. You're the After Effects artist, you're the one with the expertise, and it sure would be nice if you could spend less time doing repetitive tasks and more time doing creative stuff. So the first thing we're gonna do is use a really cool feature of After Effects and Adobe Premiere to build a template so that someone who doesn't know After Effects can still use your graphics and kick out as many versions as they need. So let's hop into After Effects and take a look. So we're gonna start with a simple example, and this is a lower third that I have built for a show about birds. It is pretty amazing. Good sound effect and everything. So imagine that you're the After Effects artist for this show, and you've designed this lower third, and now a lot of your job is going to be doing versions of this lower third. You know, there could be a dozen, 2 dozen of these per episode, and really it's just a repetitive task, changing the name, changing the title, and rendering out another version. And then of course, at the last minute, something changes. So we are gonna make it so that anybody, an editor, assistant editor, anyone who can open up Adobe Premiere is gonna be able to use this template and change it. So the first thing we need to do is figure out what do we need to give the editor or the producer control over. So obviously the name of the guest and the title of the guest, those are the 2 things that are going to change. Everything else will stay the same. So we're gonna use a really cool feature called the Essential Graphics panel. You can find that in the window menu, Essential Graphics, and it will open up a panel that looks like this. Now the first thing you need to do is to tell this panel which comp you actually wanna build controls for. So in this case, we're going to set the master comp to lower third. That's this comp right here. And this area here, this is where we're basically just gonna build a control panel. And we're only gonna put in controls for the things we need. We're gonna take all of the complexity of After Effects out of the equation. So let's start with the guest's name. So if we come down here to the name type layer and I hit UU, this will bring up any properties that have been changed from the default. This is just a shortcut to get me to this source text property. That's the one that I want to give someone control over. And it's as easy as clicking and dragging to the Essential Graphics panel, letting go, and now we have a control. Now I can rename this control into something like guest name. And now you'll see that this is actually linked to that type layer. So if I change it from Buck McFinkle to something like Doc McDucksteen or something, you'll see that it automatically updates in the template, all right? Then I'm also gonna need to put controls in for the title of the guest. So that's line 1 and line 2. There's 2 type layers here. So let me first come in and grab the source text for line 1. Now, this little message that's popping up is giving me a warning. It's saying that there's an expression on this property I just dragged in. I'm gonna tell you why in a minute, but basically After Effects is just warning me that, you know, this could create some wonky behavior if you're not aware that there is an expression on the property. I'm just gonna say okay. And I'm gonna come up here and I'm gonna name this line 01. Then I'm gonna come down and I'm gonna do the same thing with line 2. And now we're good to go. Now I wanna point out a couple of things. First of all, you'll notice that I was pretty sloppy with the upper and lower casing of these descriptions. Yet over here, everything shows up all caps. So that's done in a really, really easy way. If I select, say, line 1, and I come over here to my character panel, you'll see that this option here is selected. That's the all caps property. And if you turn that on a type layer, then it will automatically transform whatever you type into all caps. And that way you don't have to sort of remind the editor, hey, it's supposed to be all caps. It just automatically does it, all right? You wanna take bad taste out of the equation. So there's a couple of things I want to show you. So first of all, sometimes this is a 2-line descriptor of the guest, but sometimes it's a 1-line descriptor. And if I removed line 2, if I just turn it off, this is going to be out of balance. It's not going to look right anymore. So things kind of need to adjust if there's 1-line or 2-line. So watch this. If I go to line 2 and I just erase it, you see how this automatically updated and moved position and this little bar got a little thinner? So that's being done with some expressions. Now, this is not an expressions tutorial, so I'm just gonna gloss over these really quickly, but you can actually download this project file, open it up, and dissect the expressions yourself if you're curious. All you have to do is go to schoolofmotion.com and sign up for a free student account, and you can download this project file and hundreds of other cool assets, so you should do that. And we also have some free video tutorials on expressions to teach you how to get started using these, all right? So the way that this is rigged up is that there's actually 2 versions of this bottom orange panel. There's a small panel that shows up if there's 1 line of type, and then there's a different copy of it that shows up if there's 2 lines of type. And all that's changing is the opacity. So you can see that right now, because there's only 1 line, the opacity of the 1-line panel is set to 100%, and the opacity of the 2-line panel is 0. The moment I change line 2 to something else, such as dentist to the flamingos, you'll see that now the 2-line panel's opacity is set to 100%. There's some simple expressions driving that. It's basically just looking to see if there is anything in the source text of line 2, and if there's not, then it sets the opacity to 0, and if there is, it sets it to 100. We have a similar expression on this 1-line version, and there's a couple of other things going on that I'll point out to you. So the point of these expressions, by the way, is to remove the complexity and frankly some of the choice from whoever is going to be using this template. Remember, we're trying to automate a repetitive task. And while we're not using a render robot yet, we're using other humans to sort of automate a repetitive motion design task. It's helpful to do the work of setting up maybe some expressions ahead of time so that whoever then uses the template doesn't have to come ask you how to do something and won't accidentally do something that doesn't look good. One of the things I was concerned about was that an assistant editor or an editor might type in a title that is just too long and runs off the edge of this, and that would look really bad. And even if it just gets too close to the edge, it's not gonna look good. So I made an expression that essentially acts as a warning, and let me show you what that is really quickly. So here it is, and again, you can download this project if you wanna use this in your own work. And basically it just looks at how many characters the title is. And if it's above 40, then it kind of throws this error message and it tells whoever's using this that the max length is 40 characters. So let me show you how this works. If I come into line 1 and I come to the end here and I just start adding spaces to it, eventually I'm going to get to 40 characters, and it's going to tell me the max length is 40 characters. And as soon as I backspace and I go below 40 characters, it pops back on. So this is just a nice way of ensuring that whoever uses this can't go too far and make one title that's too long and kind of ruins the beautiful design I've come up with here. All right, so now we've got this essential graphics panel. It's basically impossible to use it in a way that we're not intending. If you remove line 2, it automatically adjusts the template. If you type something that's too long, it will give you a warning. This is wonderful. The last thing I want to do is add a little bit of instruction here. So one of the cool features of the essential graphics panel is the ability to add a comment to your interface. You can also group properties if you have something that's kind of complicated, but this is a very simple template. So I'm just going to add a comment. I'm going to rename that comment instructions. And then I'm just going to type in, make sure line 02 is empty if you don't need it. I'll move this to the top, and now we're good to go. So now we've got this nice control panel, and someone could, in theory, come into After Effects and just use this to make versions, but there's a way better way that's a lot easier for people who don't know After Effects, and that is by exporting this template into a format that Premiere can use. So let's do that. So I'm just gonna click Export Motion Graphics Template. I'm gonna save my project. I need to tell After Effects where to save this template. The template is called a Mogert file, so I'm gonna save it as bird_third.mogert in a folder with my project. In this case, I don't need to worry about any of these compatibility checkboxes. I'm just gonna hit OK, and it will export the template. Cool, so now we've built a template, we've made a really easy control panel for our lower third, which is actually a little bit complicated under the hood with some of those expressions. Now I'm gonna show you how to bring it into Premiere so that anybody who can open Premiere can easily make lower thirds. So let's take a look at this shot, which is going to need a lower third. You know, I think as long as I can remember, I've always loved African swallows, especially unladen ones. You know, their airspeed. So first of all, this show is going to be amazing when it's done, but this shot needs a lower third, and it sure would be nice if I didn't have to call up my After Effects genius to make me a lower third. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna import that Mogert file that we created in the previous step. So over here is the Essential Graphics panel in Premiere, and it looks pretty different than the one in After Effects. This is sort of a browser that we're looking at here of a bunch of presets that ship with Premiere, and just kind of scrolling through, you can see how many different uses there are for this technique. And then once you've opened one up, you can actually edit the settings right in Premiere. So we need to import our Mogert file. So come down here, and way buried in the corner, this tiny little icon almost off my screen, that is the button you click to install a new Mogert file. Then I'll just navigate to where I saved it. There it is, bird lower third.mogert, and just like that, I have imported it into Premiere, and you can actually see it. It showed up right down there. If you have a lot of these presets and you can't find it, you can also use this handy search feature. And there it is, bird lower third. All right, so now the next step is I need to drag this into my timeline. Now, the first time you do this, it needs to load that motion graphics template. It's almost loading After Effects in the background so that it can use After Effects' rendering engine. This can take a minute or two, so just be patient. All right, and here it is in the timeline, our bird lower third. And you can see it even came in with that beautiful screech sound effect. All right, so let's just put this on top of our beautiful experts footage here. I'm gonna move the audio layer down so that it can be on its own track. And I'm gonna move this up. And then I'm just gonna move this whole thing. And let's figure out where we want it to start. Maybe, you know, sort of right about there. All right, perfect. And just like that, we have a lower third. I've always loved African swallows, especially unladen ones. Perfect, okay. Now, unfortunately, my name is not Doc McDucksteen. Thanks, Mom. So how are we gonna change this type? Well, if you select the lower third, the Essential Graphics panel over here now changes to edit mode, and you can see we've got our instructions. Make sure line 2 is empty if you don't need it. Guess name. All right, so instead of Doc McDucksteen, I'm gonna use my bird stage name, which is Joseph Birdman. And you can see that just like that, the name is already updated. I am not a canary translation specialist, unfortunately, but I am president of the African Swallow Club. Look at that, and that just fit in there too. Now, in addition, I also once played Big Bird in a play, and I think that the audience would like to know that. So I'm just gonna type in once played Big Bird on stage. And just like that, all of the expressions, all of the templating that we did in After Effects, you can see now it's paid off because we have this very easy to use interface. And anybody can be taught in 5 seconds how to make a copy of a lower third and to select it and to change the name from Joseph Birdman to Gary Featherly. Right? And that's the amazing thing about this is that it literally creates a different instance of the lower third and you can change it. And if Gary Featherly isn't as interesting as me and only has one line of information, that's all updated automatically. And just to double check, if I tried to make this title too long, like in President of the African Swallow Club since 1992, well, that's too long and now you're getting this little error message, okay? So this is an amazing way of taking something that's a repetitive, kind of boring task, just making a million versions of something, and offloading it, kind of automating it by using human robots, people who don't know After Effects as well as you. So this is really just scratching the surface of what the Essential Graphics panel can do. And if you want to go even deeper and learn more about it, we have another video on the subject at schoolofmotion.com and on our YouTube channel, and we will link to that in the description. Now there is a small downside to this, which is that whoever's going to be making these lower thirds still needs access to Premiere. Now there's another way to do this using a really cool third-party tool called Templater, and I'm going to show you that next, and you're going to see how we can make this even easier and more automatic. All right, I bet you didn't think you'd be looking at a spreadsheet in this video on a motion design channel. So here's why we're in Google Sheets. The first thing we need to do for this second technique of automation is create a list of all of the lower thirds that we need. And so a Google Sheet's just the most obvious way to do that. I've got a column for the name of the guest, line 1, line 2, and then I have these columns here, and I'm gonna explain what those are. So let's start by making me a nice lower third. All right, so you've got Joey Korenman, and I am a lover of birds. I am also an eagle enthusiast, okay? Now, you'll notice that as soon as I hit return, this number jumped to 33 and it remained green. This is counting the number of letters in line 1. And, you know, just like After Effects has expressions, spreadsheets have expressions. And by the way, I should say that I don't know all of these off the top of my head. I just Googled them, the same as everybody. But what happens if I tried to add a little extra? What if I also said makes great omelets? Now I've breached that 40 character limit, and you can see that it's turned red. It's alerted me. So this is important because what we're gonna do is we're basically going to take this spreadsheet and feed it to After Effects like a meal, and it's going to ingest it and spit out all the renders we need. So I need to make sure that whoever is filling this out doesn't accidentally make something that's too long. And so I added a little bit of conditional formatting here, and I'm not gonna go too deep down that rabbit hole, but if you want to, you can Google conditional formatting, and basically it just makes a rule. If this number is greater than 40, turn it red, basically how it works. All right, so here's a sheet already filled out with a whole bunch of lower thirds on it. Now, if somebody had to go through and actually type all of these out in After Effects and set up the render queue and do all that, it would kind of be annoying. But of course, there is a better way. Now, if you want to follow along with the next part of this tutorial, you are going to need Templater from Dataclay. Now, I have to say, it ain't cheap. It's super duper powerful though, and so if you're running a studio or if you do this kind of thing a lot, it's going to pay for itself very quickly, but you can go to Dataclay.com. You can actually download a trial version of one of the versions of Templater. You can find out all the information there, and we will link to that in the description for this video. All right, here we go. So back in After Effects, I'm gonna go up to Window, and I'm going to open the Templater to script. Now, when you install Templater, it's going to install a script, which is the interface to use the tool, and it's also going to install an effect called Templater Settings, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So the way Templater works is you feed it a data source like a Google Sheet, and then it will apply the information in that data source to various layers in various ways that you can define. So first we need to link up our data source. Templater can take a lot of different kinds of data. You can actually do some really, really fancy stuff with it if you have a software developer handy, but I don't. So I'm just gonna use the Google integration, which is really, really simple. Now, the first time you do this, it's gonna ask you to sign in to your Google account, so you will need a Google account in order to do this, and then it's gonna pull up every Google Sheet that it finds in your account. So here is that bird lower thirds sheet we were just looking at, and I'm gonna grab the episode 1 sheet in there, and I'm gonna say okay. So now it is dynamically connected to that sheet. Cool. What good does that do us? Well, what we need to do is we need to tell After Effects which of these layers are going to be affected by this data. So the way you do that is you figure out, for example, which type layer needs to be dynamically updated. And let's just start with the name type layer. And I'm going to apply the Dataclay Templater Settings effect to it. Now, this effect has a whole bunch of settings in it. We're gonna get into a few of them in this tutorial, but for now, we don't actually have to do anything. One of the things this effect does is it literally just tells Templater that this layer is supposed to be pulling data from the Google Sheet. So you'll notice that the layer name is name with an uppercase N, line 1 with an uppercase L, line 2 with an uppercase L. If we go back to our Google Sheet, you'll notice that I have named these column headers exactly the same as I named my layers in After Effects, and that's very important. You need to match the spelling and you need to match the case exactly, because once we start running Templater, it's going to look for the header in the first row of your spreadsheet, and then it will start cycling through all of the cells. So looking at this, I see that we have information in rows 2 through 27. So let's go back to After Effects and go back to our templater 2 settings. I'm gonna set the render row to be 2 through 27. Now I also need to apply that same effect to line 1 and line 2, the templater settings effect. So what I'm gonna do is go to name, I'm gonna grab templater settings and just copy it and paste it onto these two. All right, and now we are ready to go. Now to make sure that this actually works, what I can now do is push the preview button. And there's a few settings I want to point out. So first of all, I have my render row set to 2 through 27. It's important that you set this range correctly so that templater knows where the data is that you're looking for. This is also an important setting. Preview uses next row. When I hit preview, it's going to pull data from the sheet, and it can do that in a few different ways. You can have it pull randomly, next row, previous row. Right now I have it set to next row. And if I just click this preview button, you can see automatically it pulled in the first piece of data, Joey Korenman, Eagle Enthusiast / Dog Walker. Now if I hit preview again, it goes to the next row in the spreadsheet and it populates the lower third with that data. If I hit cycle previews, it will just keep pulling rows. And this is kind of a cool way to just, sit here for a minute and just do a quick double check and make sure that everything's working the way it's supposed to, that everything looks right. And you can see because we put in the time ahead of time to do some expressions so this all gets updated dynamically, we're good to go. So everything is working exactly the way I want it to, and now we can actually send these to the render queue. So how do we do that? First, let's go into the preferences and take a look at a couple of things here. So in templater preferences, there's a few things I want to point out. So the first is the target composition. And if you don't have this set correctly, if it's not actually telling templater the right comp, then when you hit preview, you won't get the behavior you're expecting. So make sure that your target composition is set to the comp you actually care about. So lower third templater. These bot settings we're going to get into in the next section, but over here, this is really important, this replication section. So in templater, once you have your template set up the way that you want, you have a couple of options. You can actually render all 26 of these versions of the lower third, or you can replicate them, which basically just makes a new comp for each one and can add them to the render queue. It can even send them to Adobe Media Encoder. So I don't want to do that. I do want to add them to the render queue, and I think that's it. So I'm going to hit OK, and now I'm just going to hit replicate. So I just hit replicate, and as you can see, templater is going through that Google Sheet and making a new After Effects comp for every single row, and it's pulling the name, line 1, line 2, it's updating each comp dynamically, and it's doing it all while I sit here talking to you, which is amazing. All right, and it's almost done. And just like that, we have 26 comps, and just to double check, let's go into one of these and take a look. And there you go, Andrew Kramer, cooker of pies and cakes. God bless. So it also added these to the render queue, and you'll notice that the output module is set to AIF48K. And that is because I forgot to change these render options. So if you hit refresh, templater will load in every output module that you have set up in After Effects, and then you can choose that as an output. So if, for example, I wanted to do lossless with alpha or ProRes 4444, so that I can have an alpha channel because I will need an alpha, or a TIFF sequence with alpha, you can set that here, and then when you replicate and add things to the render queue, they'll be added with those settings. All right, so now we could just hit render. I also could have just hit render, and it would have done the same thing, but then taken the additional step of rendering all of them, which is also very handy. All right, so now you've seen two ways to automate repetitive tasks. Both ways do require a little bit of involvement, but obviously doing it this way is a lot easier and faster for you, the After Effects artist, than having to type all 26 versions of this lower third out by hand. The next example is going to use the bot feature of templater, and this is where it's going to blow your mind. So here's a nice little cute spooky animation. Maybe, I don't know, it's for Halloween or something. So imagine that you have a client that wants you to kick out, hundreds of this basically with different people's names on there, different dates, maybe randomize the little kind of Disney World-esque, rhymes that are at the bottom. So this would be the exact kind of thing that Templater is perfect for, because not only do you have information that needs to be updated, the person's name, but there's also some design rules, some layout rules here that need to be followed. If you have someone's name who's much longer than Jeff Gutt, the problem is it's going to make the vertical size of this type layer a lot smaller, and then the spacing is going to get thrown off. And you don't want to have to manually go in and adjust layers every single time. So, of course, there's a better way. So here's what we're gonna do. I've already got this comp set up. So let me walk you through the setup of it, okay? So there is a name layer here, right? So this Jeff Gutt layer, that's just a type layer. I don't have the template or effect on there yet. Then there's a layer called full dates, okay? So this layer here, full dates, is actually being built dynamically through an expression, which I will show you. So what this expression is doing is it's referencing two other type layers, and then it's taking the type from those layers, adding a little dash in between them and combining them together, okay? So I have these two guide layers down here at the bottom, death date and birth date. And these are dates that I would like to pull in from a Google Sheet, and then I just combine them using this full date type layer there, okay? So these are actually the layers that will need that templater setting effect. But this layer is going to reference it. It's kind of a clever way of doing it, all right? And then the final thing is the actual poem, right? That sort of tells you how this person died. And those live in this pre-comp here, COD, which stands for cause of death. It's kind of morbid. If we check that out, you'll see that I basically have a few different poems here, and they're all exactly 1 frame long. And what I'm doing is I have an expression on time remap that is basically choosing a random frame between 0 and 4, because that's how After Effects works. It's not between frame 1 and frame 5. It's frame 0 and frame 4. And again, you can download this project and dissect these expressions if you want to once you have your free School of Motion student account. The link will be in the description. And it's basing the random frame it chooses off of the length of the person's name. And that's important because everybody's name will be, you know, a different length. Most people's names will be different from one another. And so that just sort of ensures that Jeff Gutt's cause of death will be different than Jeffrey Gutenbergenstein's, right? So now, just like before, we've got some expressions sort of helping us out, doing some automation, but now we need to get the data in here automatically. And to show you how that's gonna work, we're actually gonna go on to the internet. Now, what I'm about to show you is built just using off-the-shelf software. There's nothing custom about the tools I'm about to use, but you should know that Templater is very, very powerful. And so if you have a software developer that you know, or you work at a larger company that might have software engineers, they can actually program things to plug in to Templater and do way more advanced things than I'm even going to show you. And I'm gonna talk about some of those at the end of the video, but all I want you to keep in mind is that you can go do this right now as long as you have Templater. So the first tool I want to use is Typeform. Now Typeform is just a very simple web app that lets you make forms and publish them and, you know, let users give you input. So I have built a simple form here called Death Day, all right? And here's how it works. I'm also pretending that it's sponsored by a company because honestly, I think that there is a business model that someone watching this video can utilize. This is a new way of using motion design as a business, and I want you to keep that in mind. So it starts off with a little landing page, then it asks you your name, then it asks you your birth date, and then it says, click the button to head to Deathbot 3000 or 30,001. Deathbot 3000 wasn't available when I made this tutorial, I'm sorry. So Deathbot 30,001 on Twitter. And in a few moments, you'll see your tombstone appear. If you click this, it will take you to a Twitter page, and there are actually no tweets here. So what I would like to do is send people to this form. They fill out the form, and then a few minutes later, an animation with their name and their birth and death date on a tombstone shows up here on Twitter, and we are gonna do that right now, okay? So this type form is actually connected to a Google Sheet. It's really, really easy, and a lot of apps can do this, not just Typeform. There are other form softwares that do the same thing, but I've connected it to a Google Sheet, okay? So here is that Google Sheet. It is called the Death Day Sheet. Now, here's what happens. When you connect a Google Sheet to Typeform, it will automatically create columns for all of the questions that you're asking, and it will also tell you when the form gets submitted, and it gives you this weird token. So let's just demonstrate that so you can see how it works. So if we go to the Typeform, and I type in my name, My birth date, I kid you not, is April 1st. And that's it. Now watch this. If I go over to the sheet, that quickly, it's already put that information on the Google Sheet. So hopefully you're already starting to see how this can be used automatically with Templater. Now, here's a problem. I want to be able to change what this is called so that it's a shorter name with no spaces. It'll just work better for the layer name in After Effects. And remember, the layer name has to match this for Templater to work. I also am going to need to calculate a death date. When you use Typeform and you connect it to a Google Sheet, you cannot change this Google Sheet at all or it will break and stop working. So what I did was I made another sheet in the same spreadsheet, just another page basically. And I used a little expression here inside of Google Sheets. So basically every cell references that exact same cell from the previous sheet, from death day, okay? It's a way of cleaning the data. So there's a few little expressions in here, and I'm not sure that that's the right term. Maybe formula is what you call it in Google Sheets. But from this birth date of April 1st, 1981, I am calculating a death date. And the way I'm doing that is just by adding today's date to a random number between somewhere 10 years from now or 50 years from now, okay? And again, I didn't know how to do this off the top of my head. I had to Google it, and that's the beauty of the internet, okay? So birth date, death date. Now, what is this? What's this render status? So this column is something that Templater will be expecting to see as soon as I turn on the Templater bot. It will look for a column with the header render status, and then it will look for the word ready. If the word ready is there and the bot is running, then it will grab this data and it will trigger whatever action I have set. So either rendering this out or adding it to a queue, okay? So I obviously don't want the word ready to show up until there's actual data here. So I used a little formula, I guess, to basically check to see if the name cell is blank. And if it is, this should be blank too. But as soon as there's a name there, set that to ready. And the last thing I want you to notice is that I have named these columns differently: name, birth date, and death date. All right, so now back to After Effects. So the first thing I'm gonna do is apply the Templater effect to all of the type layers that need it, okay? So let me go to name, and I will add the Dataclay Templater settings. And then I can just copy that. I'm gonna paste it to death date and birth date. And there's some other layers I'm gonna need to copy this to, even though they are not going to change dynamically the way a type layer does, okay? So we'll get to that in a minute, but first let's just wire this thing up. So I need to go to Templater and I need to choose a different data source. Now currently there's only data in the second row, so I'm just gonna set this to render row 2 through 2, and then I'm gonna hit preview and see what happens. All right, here is the problem, people. So my name is a lot longer than Jeff Gutt, and it's running off the tombstone, and that is indeed a problem. So there's an easy fix for that using Templater, which is really cool. So if I go to the name layer and I look at the Templater settings effect, there is a layout group, and inside of there's an option called scale factor, currently set to 0%. Now to show you exactly what this does, I'm gonna need to add one more row to my spreadsheet. So let's just go do that. All right, and let's pick somebody with a very short name, much shorter than Joey Korenman, and I don't know how old Chris is, but let's just pretend that it's May 12th and he was born in 1850. He's very old. Okay, so now we have Christo on the spreadsheet. We have Joey Korenman and Christo, different length names, all right? So now I need to tell Templater to render row 2 through 3, and then if I hit preview, there we go. Christo. All right, so what I need to do is first scale this name up to the correct width. All right, so let's say that we want all of the names to be this wide, okay? And don't worry that it's too close to the rest in peace. We're gonna fix that in a minute too. So what I can now do is go into the Templater settings effect and turn the scale factor up to 100. Now watch what happens when I hit preview. It has maintained the width of the type element by shrinking the type, okay? It's pretty slick. Now we still have the problem of the spacing between rest in peace and the name keeps changing, and I want it to look well designed. This is too much space, okay? So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go back into the effect controls and we're going to use the attachment property. And what we're gonna do is attach this type layer, name, to another layer. And I'm going to attach it to the layer rest in peace. And I want to attach on the bottom edge and there's a padding setting, but I don't know exactly how much I'm gonna need yet, okay? So to make this a little easier, I'm gonna tear off the effect controls and put them here. All right, so if I hit preview, you'll see that now my name is right underneath Rest in Peace, and if I hit preview again, Christo is right under there. Cool. So I want some padding there. So if I change this number, attach padding to say 10, and then I hit preview again, you'll see that now there's a little bit of padding there. So how much padding do I want? Well, I could just keep adjusting this and hitting preview, or I could do this, hit cycle previews, and while it's cycling, I can just sort of nudge these up with my arrow keys. Wait a second, see what changes. That's too much. Yeah, I think that's good. 20 is about right. Perfect. All right, so that is done. So now you can see how you can actually attach type to other layers and it will maintain the spacing and it will maintain the size automatically. It's an incredible feature of Templater. All right, so let's set the rest of this up. So now I want to do the same thing for the date on the tombstone. I want it to always have the same amount of spacing. If I go to that layer, there is no Templater settings effect on it because this layer, remember, is actually being created by an expression, not by Templater. So what I can do though is apply the Templater settings effect. And even though there is no column in my Google Sheet called full dates, I can still use the layout option, specifically the attachment. I can attach this to the name layer, and I can attach on the bottom edge, and I know I'm gonna need padding here. So I'm gonna cycle the preview, and while it's cycling, I'm just gonna start adding padding until I get what I want. All right, and then I'll stop cycling and we're good to go. Then I need to do the same thing for this poem. So I'll go to cause of death layer, I'll apply the Templater settings effect, I'll attach it to the full date on the bottom, and there will need to be padding. And I can actually just use the same padding value from this, which was 90. Right, and just to check it, let me preview this. Aha, that did not work as I expected. And the reason is there is actually, if you look at this pre-comp here, you can see that there's a lot of room on top of the comp that's empty, and Templater is counting that. And so I actually need the padding to be a different number. So I'm gonna cycle the preview. And this padding may actually need to be negative number, which is another thing you can do. All right, so now I'm just eyeballing it every time it changes. And there we go, just like that. All right, so we've connected the Google Sheet to After Effects. This comp is pulling data from that sheet and changing the name, changing the birth date, changing the death date, all dynamically. And that data is actually coming from a type form, a web form that you can literally access on your cell phone, which is really cool. So the next step is we are going to turn on the Templater bot, and we're gonna tell it to keep an eye on that Google Sheet and kick out renders every time there's a new input. So before we enable the bot, what I'd like to do is go into preferences and set a few things. Now, keep in mind that the end goal here is to have these render out and end up on Twitter without us doing anything. And to do that, we're gonna use a feature of Adobe Media Encoder. So for replication, what I'm gonna want is to send replicates to Adobe Media Encoder. So by checking this, Templater not only creates a new comp for every version of this animation, it actually saves each of those comps in a separate After Effects project file. That's gonna be useful because we're gonna set up a watch folder, which you will see in a minute. So now let's take a look at the bot settings. So there's two actions that the bot can take. It can actually just render straight out of After Effects when a new version is detected, or it can replicate using these settings over here. So by having replicate turned on, when Templater detects a new row in that Google Sheet, it will create an entirely new After Effects project with the correct animation in there, and it will save it where I tell it. The bot name is not important in this example, and this is probably a good time to point out that Dataclay has really good documentation on this tool. So if you're interested in this, go to their website and read through it, and you'll be able to find out really quickly what all of these settings are for. This one's important. How many minutes should we wait before checking for data in a Google Sheet? Now, I put 1 in there, but it's telling me that it's actually going to wait 3 minutes between checks because of a Google Sheets API limitation. That's not Dataclay's doing. That's Google saying you have to wait 3 minutes between checks, and everything else is set the way we want. I want to make sure that my target composition is set to graveyard start. Now we need to set the output folder. This is really important. So let's go here. And what I want to do is go into the folder for this tutorial, make a new folder, and I'm going to call this render watch. And you will see why in a minute. Now I need to set the render option, so I'm going to change the output to something else. And in this case, it's not really going to matter because I'm actually going to be using Adobe Media Encoder to set the render settings for this. So I'm just going to pick lossless. Doesn't really matter. I don't have to worry about the render row setting because the bot is actually going to be looking for new rows, and that's how it's going to know what to render and what to replicate. And then I'm going to enable the bot. And now you can see it has detected the change, it's replicating, and it's done. Well, that was easy. The end result of what we just saw is that now in that render watch folder, there are 2 After Effects project files. The names don't really tell you much, but inside of each one is a version of this animation, the Joey Korenman version and the Chris Do version. Okay, cool. So what's the next step? So here's Adobe Media Encoder, and what we're gonna do is set up a watch folder, okay? Now, a watch folder is just a folder on your hard drive that, while Media Encoder is running, gets monitored. And if it detects new files in there, it will automatically import them, render them, and do anything else that you tell it to do. So I'm gonna add a watch folder. And the folder that I wanna add is this render watch folder, okay? So I'll choose that. And now it is watching that folder. And what I want to do is tell it what settings to use for rendering and where to put the output and all of that good stuff. So the first thing I want to do is check this, make sure that the format's correct. And H.264 is perfect because this is going to go on Twitter. Then we want to tell it what preset to use. And you can see I've already got a couple set up here. So I created one called Deathbot Twitter 640 by 640. And if I click on this, you'll see the properties that I've set up for it, okay? So in terms of video, I have it set to 640 by 640. 30 frames per second, hardware encoding, all that good stuff. Audio, there actually is no audio, so this isn't really important at all. Now, the big setting that we are concerned with is this publish setting. What's really cool about Media Encoder is that you can tell it to publish automatically to a whole bunch of different services, whatever it just rendered. So it's of course got all the Adobe stuff, but then you can also do Facebook, YouTube, and even Twitter. Now, in order to use this, you have to sign in and authorize Adobe Media Encoder to be able to use your Twitter account. So I've already done that, and it's using my Deathbot 30,001 account. You can even set the status that it will include when it uploads the video, and you can tell it to delete the local file after upload, which is good if you're concerned about hard drive space. All right, so I'm gonna hit OK on this. So the preset I wanna use is this Deathbot Twitter one, okay? Now, it's going to automatically put the outputs in that render watch folder in a subfolder called output, and that's it. Now, if we go back to the queue, you just need to make sure that auto encode watch folders is turned on, and then you're good to go. All right, so let's do a quick recap. We have a type form that asks you for your name, and I have the Animator's Survival Kit right in front of me. So let's just say Richard Williams, birth date. Let's use my birth date. This form then connects to a Google Sheet that will take that date, calculate a death date from it, and set the render column status to ready. We have a templater inside of After Effects running a bot that every 3 minutes checks the Google Sheet to see if anything has changed, and if so, it will kick out a new version Save in After Effects project file into our watch folder. As soon as that's done, Adobe Media Encoder will queue it up. And you can even see down here in the preview that it is the new name, Richard Williams, with a birthday and a death date. Now, the magic will be, can it upload it to Twitter automatically for us? Oh my goodness, there it is on Twitter. That is pretty cool, isn't it? And there you go. Now, it's definitely cool what we just did, but that's not the important thing. The important thing to me is that this is an entirely new business model. This is now a service that you can offer your clients. You can literally build them a little Twitter bot just like this one using off-the-shelf software like Templater. And there are companies out there already doing this. MoShare is a subsidiary of Cub Studio based out of London. They are using Templater to do some amazing stuff. And Algo is a company connected to Elo in Italy, and they're not using Templater as far as I know, but they have their own version of a piece of software like this that is automating things for their clients, and it's basically passive income for motion designers. So I hope you learned a ton from this. I hope you're excited about the possibilities that Templater gives you, and hopefully this just got you thinking about how you could use it what you could offer your clients, and how you can incorporate this tool into your workflow. Thank you so much for watching. Check out all of the show notes in the description on YouTube or on schoolofmotion.com, and I will definitely see you on the next one. Thanks again for watching, and if you learned something, boy, would it be nice if you liked the video and subscribed to our channel. And please leave us comments, questions, and tutorial requests as we are ramping up video production at School of Motion. Also, head on over to schoolofmotion.com to grab a free student account, which will get you access to hundreds of project files, our free Path to MoGraph starter course, our Motion Mondays newsletter, exclusive discounts, and lots of other goodies. All right, time to stop talking.